Hello and welcome back. I'm Dawn Westmoreland, your talk host of the Empowered Whistleblower Radio Show on WPVM FM LP 103.7, the voice of Asheville. I am coming from Asheville, North Carolina, and I've been here over 20 years. Been happy to be a talk host, and I'm delighted to have Felix Nater on again. He's a friend, but more than that, he's one of the world's leading violence prevention consultants out there. He's been interviewed by Wolf Blitz on CNN. He's just a very impressive person, always taking the high road, but just very wise with all the wisdom of how do we reduce violence. Now, we know we can't get rid of all of violence, but what we do know is we can reduce it. And he is one of the best. He's my go-to person. My show airs every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Eastern. It's syndicated, could be heard on up to 200 radio stations with the Pacifica Network. Felix, so delighted to have you again. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine, Dawn. It's always nice looking at your bright, smiley face.
Ah, yes, 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 yes. I love that because I always videotape these radio recordings. Let's jump into it because we got lots to say. Felix, we got a new administration. We got changes in the world. Eggs prices have gone up, inflation, we may be going into recession. I'm not in your position. I'm just a HR person, with 32 plus years. And I know the workplace can be affected, but let's just jump in. Is there an increased possibility of violence in America at this time?
What a mouthful of a question, Dawn. And thank you very much for having me, by the way, because that question leads into the whole essence and premise of my existence. I am a workplace violence prevention consultant. And for all those HR directors who feel that they can't manage the threat of workplace violence, yes, they can, by
Mhm.
setting a good leadership example, by fostering a cultural climate of supportive involvement of all issues that employees bring to their attentions, and setting an example that personifies your commitment to workplace safety and security through the workforce. Unfortunately, the example that we're seeing today by the national administration of our beautiful country here is a good example of how not to handle terminations and separations. A very good example that should lay out for all senior leaders vivid clarity on what I mean about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah. And it's getting so deep and personal, Felix, that I know two of the federal workers that were laid off. One worked for the Veteran Affairs, and she had mentioned Veteran Affairs had spent over $1 million in her training to help veterans out there. And then all of a sudden, boom, she doesn't have a job.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I have a practical application that I've used that's a visual dramatization of the problem. So imagine there's a rubber band around your hand, right? And you are receiving notification that your job is going to go away, regardless of where you are, in government, in corporations, and in a small or mid-sized company. And all you're dealing with this at home. And that rubber band is beginning to expand because the missus and the family are discussing what are the alternative solutions to the salvation of our financial situation. I don't know, honey. So what's going to be the plan in terms of how do we subsist? How do we exist? I don't know, honey, because I've been at this job for 20 years. Now I have to go out and find a new job. Who's going to take care of the bills? I mean, I'm not working anymore. You made me stay home to raise the children. I become unattractive as a new employee because of my age. So what do we do? The phone calls are coming. Dunning notices are being, hurled at us through the mails. We don't have enough in our savings account. We got this last baby that's finishing up college in May. How do we subsist? Before you know it, guess what happens to that rubber band, Dawn? It pops.
It pops.
And when it pops, the imagination runs wild on what thoughts can pursue those emotional feelings that now have to be recontained.
Yeah. Felix, if I recall right, 1 out of 4 active shooters usually, wait a minute, let me rephrase that I think it's a low percentage of people who are out there doing violence have mental health problems. My understanding is a lot of times it builds up, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up, and then they snap. Am I correct on that?
The percentage of people that actually commit violence on the mental health side of the issue is so small, so minuscule. It's the emotional response by an individual who feels totally affronted by your lack of empathy and consideration of the situation. Look, you and I were in government, right? I was in government, I was in military, and back then they had thoughtful ways of reducing the force.
Mhm.
There was thoughtful ways. They were discussed at the secretary level, and those discussions were managed by the secretary and the department heads. And they created an affable approach that employees would accept and embrace as their decision in wanting to take advantage of the incentives. The way it's done is unfortunately being done today is an unfortunately precursor to considerations that are negative and adverse and adversarial that we should avoid at all cost.
Yeah. I can't help but bring this up, social media. I mean, we have to get out there because we work for ourselves, you and I, Felix. And, we put post out content to help people with the work that we do. We engage, we market our services so that people know more about us. But there's a lot of negativity on all the social media. Do you think that incites anger and violence?
It really does. It really does from two different immediate angles. One from people who are uninformed and misinformed who are making judgment calls. Nobody is questioning decisions made by the president in terms of what needs to be done. What should be happening simultaneously is the leaders that are his direct reports should be looking at this and deciding what's best to protect his decision making so the outcome has more favorable appearances. In social media, the gamut runs the imagination of the people who are posting with their own opinions, with their own misunderstanding of the issues, with the impact it has their friends, their families, and themselves. And so all it does is foments hostility, and it makes it difficult for people to be level-headed in their thinking process.
Yeah. Felix, I've been so delighted to have you on the show before. I want to give our listeners just a little background. I'd like you to share a little bit of your background, of your history, of how you've gotten to where you're at. I mean, you are retired from the military and you work for as a postal inspection officer, but let's share a little bit about you and why should everybody be listening to your guidance today? I know I do because I know you.
Well, what I hear, Dawn, when I get called by an interested prospect who calls and says, Felix Nader, I'm looking at your website and everything you're saying on your website relates to how I feel about a relationship that you and I should have. And the reason why I believe they feel that way is, I can go and obtain all the certifications I want behind my name. I can go and get a master's degree. I can go and get a PhD degree. But you know what's the best experience after the acquisition of all that is working in the midst of these issues and dealing with the emotions, dealing with the intelligence, dealing with the people involved, dealing with the incidents. I have the good fortune as a United States Postal Inspector before getting into this assignment to actually work those issues from the employee level right through senior management, including testimonies regarding decisions that senior management made that affect people's well-being and health, including testimony in criminal situations where their behavior crossed over to criminal conduct. So in Nader Associates, you're not getting someone who has certifications. You're getting someone who has experience and expertise derived from actual involvement in knowing how to communicate and knowing how to engage senior leaders and also knowing how to tailor the communication channels so there's a relationship between all parties involved. Simply rolling up a shingle and saying, I'm a security consultant who specializes in workplace violence is a joke. And I think
Yes.
people who call,
Yes.
before they call should say, give me some proof that you do what you say you've done with success, with measurable, performance indicators of your performance. And I can do that. I can show that. Anyone who cares to just dig further, go to my website, look at my testimonials, go to my LinkedIn, look at those testimonials, and call them up and ask them, did he write this or did you write this?
I love that. Such powerful words. And you have a book out, Felix, which I have right behind me in my library. You wrote a book. I know for years I kept saying, I hope you write a book because you're just so full of knowledge. Let's talk about that book because I think that book could help everybody.
When I first started opening my big mouth here in the Carolinas, after reestablishing my family from New York, home of record here is in North Carolina, I met a young man by the name of David. And David is the co-author of our book. And he and his wife, Ella, called and says, Mr. Nader, we've been watching you on social media and you're very different. And we are professionals in the area of behavioral, and we work a lot of issues in the area of workplace violence. You're different, you're unique. We want to encourage you to use our offices as your West Coast offices anytime you're in the area. You know why? Because your approach to workplace violence prevention is the gentleman's approach. You cannot beat someone over the head and convince them they need to do what you're suggesting needs to be done. It's influential. So this book is a book that was, of course, nudged by you, but was supported by them. They encouraged me to no ends. They took all my documents, they reviewed my documents, and they were the ones who actually assembled the contents for this book from my documents. So it represents an opportunity for people who are serious-minded and want to do something. This book is a handy resource and a guide for them. It doesn't have all the answers, and they certainly should have it reviewed in final implementation of their policies with legal and all those involved. But it certainly is a good beginning for people who want to know how to get their act together.
Where do we find this book?
You can find it at Amazon. You can find it through the publisher and I do a lot of marketing of it myself through the publisher. You can find it through any source that sells the books online. But the whole premise behind this, Dawn, if I could just interject, is really to impress upon senior leaders that workplace violence, contrary to what they believe and have been told, is preventable. And let me tell you how it's preventable. By terminating people with empathy, by creating a policy and a rule that says, this is how you treat my people. And while disciplining people in the organization is a business model that's essential, how to discipline people? By protecting their safety and security, whether they're in a work site, they're in a school, they're in a health building, or they're out in the field. Let them know that you care about them by developing genuine programs that go to adult appeal for training, learning, and applying the information that they learn.
And you and I have had some lengthy conversations about how to fire people. For example, I know in HR, 32 years, you don't just fire somebody. As you alluded earlier, these people are that are working, they're depending on benefits, putting food on the table, supporting maybe a wife or husband, partner that, could have a chronic illness, could have cancer and stuff. It certainly affects everyone.
Well, how you approach it. I encourage that whenever you do a termination, that you diminish the intensity of the negativity and the potential hostility by creating an environment that's conducive to all involved. Create an environment where the employee on the way out has an opportunity to tell you how they feel in an adult fashion, nothing adversarial, nothing confrontational. So you could learn from that employee, as opposed to seizing it as an opportunity to implement your zero tolerance policy and then walk them out the door. Look, what's happening in our country today is a good example of how not to run your corporations.
Let's go into that. I love that subject.
Well, what I mean is we need to reduce our organizations. There's a need for us to look at how we operate, how we can redefine those operational needs, adjust our personnel needs, and then have a conversation with the staff in advance of your decisions to ultimately curtail their employment. And there's a way of doing this. You involve them in the plan, you make them part of the solution so that ultimately they have an opportunity to choose how they want to leave. They can leave because they want to retire. They can leave because you're being offered a severance package. They can leave because maybe they've met their own goals and objectives. They're satisfied that with a little bit of money they're getting now, they can start all over again. But involving adults in a conversation that adults need to have. They're not children. What you're doing is you're causing people who have responsibilities to rise their personal level of emotions and to justify and rationalize things that they normally would never have thought of in retribution and retaliation. And we want to avoid that kind of discussion and feeling.
Well, with all these firings that are going on, Felix, in the federal government, as you said, you know a lot about the government. You spent decades in the government.
On both sides.
Yes, I'm retired from the Air Force and I put in 5 years with the VA. So there's 25. You probably have more years than I do, but we
Yes.
understand government. We understand a lot of the policies, the rules, the statutes, the laws, um, so people get discouraged, other people, because they're out there like, am I next? Am I next? Am I next? What do you suggest to these people who are concerned that maybe they're a federal worker or they could be affected by, they could even be outside the federal government. They could be affected by what's going on today.
Well, I tell you how it bothers me. It's kind of equivalent to how it's probably bothering them. My phone rings all the time. I no longer pick it up and gladly say Nader Associates. I let it go to voicemail. You know why? Because
Why?
it's not a client calling me and wanting to discuss a potential relationship. It's an unhappy victim of these separations who know of the name and want to talk to someone. And to hear their emotion is to feel how they feel.
Mhm.
And so now I'm going to voicemail and then assessing and evaluating whether or not I want to have that conversation with people who leave their phone, sometimes leave a phone number, and many times they don't. I
Yeah.
say put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're going to deal with on a negative side of the equation.
Mhm.
Feel the way they would feel if you were abusive in their approach. And this whole approach to the separation of these government employees, with all due respect, is harmful to their well-being, psychological well-being and mental well-being and emotional well-being. We don't treat people that way. And of course, corporations, they know that, which is why they work so hard to develop and implement programs that are focused on people, the employee value. I get that. But if anybody was ever looking for a way of how not to do this, it's the way our government is doing. And oh, by the way, we can't put the blame on the one individual who's the leader of our country. We have
Mhm.
to spread that wealth of blame around to the people who work for him, who should be able to say, "Hey, boss, we shouldn't do it this way. Let me suggest alternative ways of doing it." But they're silent in all of this, and as a result, the impression is that you don't care about me, and therefore I don't care about you. I've given you my time, I've given you my education, I've given you my family, and this is the way I'm treated. Shame on you.
Mhm. Felix, there's a lot of people taking pot shots, as we call it, and they're not happy. Okay, and it could be either side of the, Democratic. It doesn't matter. Republican. People are taking pot shots on social media. Is there a way to reduce that because it incites a lot of emotion that's not always positive?
You're getting me in a direction I didn't want to go, but I appreciate that. We're all responsible for what's happening. The media doesn't represent the reality of the situation the way it was done in previous years. The conveyance of this is not in an honest fashion. We're quick to attack because we show the bad side of individuals without taking an opportunity to look at the potential good side of situations. So where's the platform to have these discussions? On social media. And social media creates an opportunity for us to feel that we can say what we want to say because we're hidden behind social media, and people feel empowered and emboldened to say a lot. But do they really have a handle on what's happening in the real world? No. So maybe sit back, and if you're going to say something, do it the way I do it, tactfully and diplomatically. Find the best way of presenting it so that your message gets heard, and you invite dialogue that's along the same lines, where people see a potential solution, even though they're low on the totem pole, and they're having amicable discussions. This anger between political parties is not a way for the United States of America to be leading the world or to consider itself to be a leader anymore. We should reduce that angst, reduce that heated need to be confrontational, and come up with viable, amicable conversations, even on social media. We can have those conversations on social media. We can reduce the level of intensity. We can look at what the national government is trying to do and say, hey, maybe it's initially being done wrong, but is the ultimate intent an objective that is noble? Had it been done correctly from the beginning? It is, of
Mhm.
course, it has discussionable points to consider that have merit. But
Mhm.
social media doesn't give you an opportunity to do that because everybody jumps in and offers their 2 cents, rightfully or wrongfully. We can't take away that right to speak about how they feel.
Mhm. And I want your opinion. Why are people so angry, anxious, confused? I mean, why are we where we're at today?
Perception is a huge factor. Not knowing forces people to make decisions without the knowledge that they need to have. So perception, 9/10 of reality, causes people to overreact based upon what they don't know. Perceptions of what other people have and other people have achieved and acquired makes the other people that don't have these achievements feel like they were left out. Um, Perceptions of people complaining about other people who are always making a big deal of things and stations in their lives, seeming not to be happy with where they are. So it's all an impression that people derive from the media, from TV, from the news, from any way they can fashion an opinion. They will fashion that opinion if it comports with the way they feel. And hopefully the way they feel would be positive. But you and I know on social media and even in our family conversations, those conversations are not sociable at all. They're all hostile.
Where does resiliency and courage come into all of this?
Is recognizing that we're in it all for the hopeful for the long-term survival of our way of life. Our democracy is very important. Our employment is very important. Our ability to navigate those difficult work environments is important to me and was important to me. And look, I wasn't adverse from being a person that was on the carpet for doing things that were questionable, but I was always honest. And I always knew that if I attracted the attention of my leaders, it was because I did something dumb. I put the target on my chest and caused that attraction. But were they always resolved in a favorable outcome? Absolutely, because I didn't make it personal. It was a business, and the business needed to run its business, and I crossed the line of appropriate conduct, and they challenged me, and the outcome was favorable to both. So we need to temper this need to be argumentative, confrontational, all the very same things that help me identify the warning signs and risk factors and the behaviors that escalate up that escalator of concern, and tone it down and recognize that if we just get behind in our own ways, the leadership of this country, the employer in their intentions to reduce the force, we can come up with, I would say, amicable solutions if we all become unified and stop this name calling.
Mm, mm.
It's difficult. I mean, this is just pie in the eye sky thinking. But again, I'm a conflict manager. You know, I look at the high outcome and the better outcome of value discussions as opposed to confrontational discussions that really are just one way. Because when you're attacking me, I'm shutting down. I'm no longer listening.
Sure.
But if you have that amicable discussion, it becomes two-way.
Mm. Now, as far as trying to persuade people to be less angry, persuade them to take action, what can you recommend on that? Because there's a lot of angry people today, and it has a rippling effect, as we know.
Thank goodness a psychiatrist and a psychologist who are listening to me are saying, I'm glad he's not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I
Good.
don't know how I can influence it, but I will tell you this. When I was a young postal inspector, um, I had responsibility for interviewing some bad people.
Mm,
And I was questioned as to my tactics and my ability to get sworn statements from people who had done some bad things. And you know, in the end, this one individual told the U.S. attorney or the assistant U.S. attorney that Mr. Nader treats me with dignity and respect.
ooh, ooh,
So that was powerful. You
very
know, so
powerful.
if we were just to step back and treat one another with dignity and respect, it's difficult for me to say this and expect an adult to appreciate where I'm coming from. But ever raising your children, I'm sure you didn't use a bat to influence them. I know in my house, the six of them that came through our home, we never talked in terms of a bat approach. It was always an influential opportunity to hear both sides. It's difficult when you're a peon in this massive thing called the United States of America to feel as though your voice is being heard. You vote, and the people you vote for don't get elected.
Yeah. And you must be reading my mind, because I was going to ask you, after you just said that about peon, for the everyday person, and there's so many people out there that are living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe they're living less and they're thinking, I don't have a voice.
It is so,
But we know better.
yeah.
What do you suggest to them? What kind of advice would you give to them to make
This is such an emotional contagion, Dawn. This is such an emotional contagion that the best that I could do is wrap your arms around your family and reevaluate your family goals and objectives and assess and determine where you are. And if you've achieved the things you wanted to achieve up until that point, there's always a possibility to reframe the goals and objectives and start all over again. And if you have that mindset where you're willing to pick up the pieces and move forward, situations are salvageable. Quick story. I got involved with a case out of New York City where a young man was threatening suicide.
Mm,
I got involved. And this is what he said to me, making a long story short. This is what he said to me in presence of the CEO and the HR director. If you all had cared the way Mr. Nader cares about why I felt the way I felt, we wouldn't be sitting here and I would be a contributing manager that I was before this whole mess started. We
wow.
have to show we care about one another.
Mhm.
That's the simplest way for me to say it. Smile at someone who looks at you. Don't turn away because you make eye contact. Greet someone that you normally wouldn't greet, and don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions.
Yeah, that's
Those
a big
assumptions impede communication.
one. Mhm. What I'm hearing from you in this whole talk today, this whole interview is empathy. And because you're a friend of mine and I know your background, you're a family man, you've risen through challenging times, you're a minority. I believe you consider yourself a minority, but yet you're not bitter about life in general. You're out there trying to make a difference, a positive difference. And I appreciate that. And I know the people who know you very well, and there's many people who really respect you.
Well, life is what you make it, as
Mhm.
the songs say, right? When I was a young sergeant major, I had a first sergeant who said to me, "In the army that I come from, Sergeant Major, we don't have wimpy sergeant majors like you." My response was, in the army I'm in, I lead the way that I can effectively influence decisions in peacetime that will allow these soldiers to be responsible in wartime. So when you're the sergeant major, you do what you want. And since I'm the sergeant major, I lead from influence. Have a nice day. We have to have greater belief and credibility in our own selves before we can influence others.
Mm, such a big one. I know that as a life coach, that if you don't believe in yourself, then how are you going to see the world in, in a clear, accurate, more positive way?
Right. And this is the whole philosophy of my business is all based upon the model of leadership, right? Leadership, if you want to lead people in difficult situations, put yourself in the person's situation and find out how you would receive the way you would be treated and lead from example, lead from experience. Let your expertise dictate the interaction that you plan on having so it doesn't escalate. There's no reason in the world for you to have an exit plan that isn't mutually supportive of the organization's intent and the employee's well-being,
Mm,
right? Discipline shouldn't be an opportunity to get even, right?
right. And a lot of people want to get even or teach people a lesson. We're down to our last minute. Felix, where can people get a hold of you? Remind us again where to get your book and the title of your book.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Dawn, very, very much for allowing this dialogue to take place. This was a complete surprise to both of us, I know, and it probably went off a little bit, but consultants that I am requires that we have these conversations. You can
Yes.
find me at naderassociates.com, www.naderassociates.com. You could reach me at my office here in North Carolina, 704-784-0260, and my mobile phone, 516-946-8416.
And
I am
Nader
not,
N-A-T-E-R. I'm sorry.
right, Nater. I am not someone you need to be afraid of. I am a friend who's been through a lot and appreciates what you're going through. And all it is a matter of establishing what your ultimate goal is, collaborating on how we can achieve that, and let's work together to make things happen. Whether it's me or some other consultant, you've got to get your ducks in order and identify your goals and your objectives.
Felix, it's always, always great to talk to you. Thank you for your sage advice. Now you know, I know why Wolf Blitzer interviewed you. Thank you to the listeners. Stay empowered. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Always remember, if you need help, reach out. And if I can't
Absolutely.
help you, I will send you to someone who can.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much.